You mentioned the transgender issue. Obviously, that's a big, hot button topic. I mean, it was just on Good Morning America. Just how do you navigate that? I mean, you have one side who completely would say that that should not even be allowed, and then you have the other sides that are much more. I don't want to say anyway. I guess tolerant is the word, or they feel like they should be more embraced. How do you balance that and deal with all those perspectives?
Yeah, so in Connecticut, we look first at our state statute, which specifically defines gender as being consistent with gender identity. And as such, you can't discriminate against anyone based on gender identity. So that's the first thing that when we talk through our talking points. And the second thing that we mention is, and so important, is that these are kids. We know that at the NCAA level, at the international professional levels, there are very different requirements for participation. And we believe that at those levels, that's the right way to go. When you talk about dealing with high school kids, you're dealing with people that are adolescents as young as 13. And they have a challenge to grow up as it is. A lot of identity issues, not just gender identity, but who they are as people is emerging and changing, and it's confusing. And there are different rights of privacy. There are different parameters around medical intervention even. So it's a very different conversation when you're talking about the high school age group. Our organization wants to be inclusive and protect their privacy rights. So our policy works for us. In other states, the policies are different, and their statutes might be different about how gender is defined. So we want to make sure that we support state associations, help them navigate those conversations, hopefully being supportive of kids first and foremost.
How do you balance that? I mean, again, and you make a good point saying it's high school, and then there needs to be a development in high school that, we take this stuff seriously as well. So, I mean, how do you balance between, these are adolescents and these are, but there's also a very serious side of this where scholarships are now involved and, kids who are trying to, compete at a national, to the competitiveness of it. How do you balance that? And that's got to be really tough.
Yeah, so when it's an individual sport, in Connecticut, obviously track and field was the one in the spotlight. We talk with people about the fact that kids are going to go to college on scholarship based on their individual performance, not the place they finished in the CIAC State Open. At the same time, we recognize that it's important for kids to experience those victories too, and it may not feel good for some people to say, "Wow, well, a transgender student athlete beat a cisgender student athlete." And was it because they're transgender? We don't know if that was the sole reason. We have transgender student athletes that are not beating cisgender student athletes. In fact, in track and field. So it's not necessarily because they're transgender. But we try to remind people that, kids are going to perform at their best level. And perhaps they will go to college and play, compete. Perhaps they won't. Perhaps they'll get a scholarship. Perhaps they won't. But we want to always be having conversations with people about that. Because again, it's an issue that doesn't feel comfortable for some people. And we want to be empathetic. But we want to remind folks that when the kids go off to college, there are different standards in place. And transgender student athletes, transgender female, will have to abide by different requirements at the collegiate level. So it will be a different situation when they compete in college.
Can you feel all this has really touched off a big issue. I mean, I don't think I've seen anything like it. Maybe that's a social media thing, but I mean, where would you put this in as far as high school issue? I mean, concussions, I guess, is another one of those deals. Things like that. How would you categorize that? This issue?
Certainly, right now, it feels like it would be top 5 in perhaps in high school sport history. I can't speak back to the origins, which are about 100 years now for high school sports in the U.S. that have been organized and belonging to associations. But I think in my tenure, certainly this is in the top 5 maybe it's top 3. So it's a very important issue. It's one that certainly isn't quickly resolved, not accepted by everyone, our policy anyway. But it's an issue that we still want to be transparent, be open to conversation, talk with people who want to speak with us respectfully, and it's gonna be on all of our plates for a while to come.